Hey everybody, very happy to be with you. We're going to talk a little about the Northwest Prosperity Zone's labor market now, but first I'll tell you a little bit about LEAD. At LEAD, we collect and publish data like unemployment rates. We have a team that does large-scale longitudinal data analysis, mostly for program evaluation purposes. We also produce things like employment projections and star jobs, which you may be familiar with, and we maintain a host of data tools that are intended to make our data more accessible for our many customers. So to begin, let's talk jobs numbers. Now, the good news here is that as of the second quarter of 2023, the Northwest has recovered from job losses suffered at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. But that job growth has been slower than job growth at the state level. Now, to be clear, and this won't come as much of a surprise, but it's worth pointing out that a lot of that statewide growth is happening in two areas in particular, Raleigh and Charlotte. But it's also worth pointing out that while jobs have recovered for the Northwest region as a whole, we don't see that recovery happening evenly across the region. So we have a couple of counties, Mitchell and Avery counties, that have experienced strong recoveries, while several other counties still lag behind their job levels from 2019. And yet, despite the Northwest job recovery having been slower than the state's job recovery, the Northwest's unemployment rate is slightly lower than the state's and has been consistently for a few years now. So the portion of folks in the Northwest who can't find work is actually quite low. And this is explained in part by regional labor force growth. Now, your labor force is just the number of people living in your region that are working or looking for work. And so while the Northwest's job market isn't growing at the pace of the state's job market, neither is its labor force. And so we see this balance between labor force growth and job growth that has contributed to particularly low unemployment rates in the Northwest. So I also want to talk about what we call tightness in the labor market. And if you've heard anybody from LEAD present on the labor market at any time over the past probably 6 years, you'll probably know that North Carolina and the U.S. more broadly is experiencing an historically tight labor market, which means that there are relatively few job seekers for all the job openings out there in the economy. And the story is very similar in the Northwest. So this sort of situation creates challenges for employers trying to hire, but on the other hand, it creates real opportunities for job seekers who find themselves in a position better able to switch jobs or demand higher wages or better benefits. But there have been signs of loosening in labor markets in recent months. For both the state and the Northwest, the number of job seekers has remained pretty stable, but the number of job openings has been creeping downwards slightly or steadily over the last year. And so whether or not this is the beginning of some sort of landing engineered by the Federal Reserve, LEAD will continue to continue monitoring these indicators. For now, what we can say is that the economy is still growing, and most forecasters are optimistic that we may be able to avoid a recession in the year to come. So while tightness in the labor market certainly has an impact on worker wages, it's also well established that higher levels of education are associated with higher levels of pay. We often refer to this as the higher education wage premium. And I hope that everybody here knows what STAR jobs are, but for the benefit of anybody that's unfamiliar, they are mostly jobs that LEAD projects to grow strongly over the coming decade. So if we take a look at the highest paying 5-star jobs in the Northwest, they all require at least a bachelor's degree, which I think highlights the education wage premium in this region specifically. So with that in mind, I want to spend a minute talking about labor market alignment. This can be a confusing concept, but it's something that My Future NC has been thinking about and trying to communicate for a few years now. And we've been analyzing labor market alignment by career cluster. So we'll start here by looking at the health science career cluster. So over the past year, about 41% of total job openings in the Northwest have been in health science. And if the region's post-secondary credentialing system were perfectly aligned, and to be clear, nobody is perfectly aligned in the state, but if in this hypothetical situation, the post-secondary credentialing system was perfectly aligned with those job openings, we'd expect to see 41% of credentials awarded in the same career cluster. And instead, we see about 14% of regional credentials conferred to students studying in health science. So in this way, we'd say that the Northwest is under-concentrated in health science credentials. We see something similar in the transportation, distribution, and logistics career cluster, where about 10% of total job openings occurred, but only about 3% of regional post-secondary credentials were awarded. So again, we'd say that the Northwest is under-concentrated in these credentials. And these two career clusters are both highlighted in My Future NC's regional attainment profile. Okay, let's spend a few minutes talking a little about the future of the Northwest Prosperity Zone. LEAD projects modest regional job growth through 2030, meaning nearly 18,000 new jobs created from 2021 to 2030. And we expect this growth to be led by the manufacturing sector. Now, these projections don't account directly for jobs created through economic development projects, but there have been 780 new jobs announced in the region as a part of these sorts of economic development projects over the past 2 years. And these too have been led by manufacturers. So maybe LEAD's employment projections were onto something here. We're also expecting to see some rebounding population growth in the region, according to the state demographer. Over the past decade, over the most recent decade, the Northwest population grew by just 1.2%. But in the decade prior, population growth was 4.9%. So in the decade to come, the state demographer is projecting growth to climb back to 5.3%. And we're also expecting the population to continue aging, as is the case most everywhere in North Carolina and the US. The share of population age 65 and over went from 17% in 2012 to 21% in 2022, and it's projected to be at 24% in 2032. Okay, so I've also been encouraged to plug a couple of our products that might be helpful to this crowd. And first up, if you're unfamiliar with LEED's STAR jobs, these are occupations that have been identified as relatively high-paying and fast-growing by region across the state. You can see here a selection of the largest 5-star jobs here in the Northwest, and you'll see that we're looking at a lot of healthcare and manufacturing related occupations, which are directly related to those growing industries that we just covered. And I also want to mention nccareers.org, a site for North Carolina students and other job seekers alike, that includes a bunch of labor market data and information about education providers, all very intentionally designed to be easily consumed by most anybody. And that's all I've got. I appreciate the time.